So when do you think the media is going to start paying attention to this case, if ever?
I don't think they likely are going to start paying attention to this case, in large part because they don't regard Julian Assange as being part of their club and therefore don't understand or don't care about the grave press freedoms posed by this indictment and the precedent that it could set that could allow them and their own work to be criminalized. They spent 5 years very flamboyantly feigning concern about assaults on press freedom, by which they meant that Trump would say something insulting to Jim Acosta or post some adolescent tweet about Wolf Blitzer and Chuck Todd. But in the meantime, right under their noses, you had the gravest threat to press freedom by far during the Trump years, which was the unsealed indictment of Julian Assange. And there were a few of them during the Trump years that would talk about it in passing because it enabled them to demonize Trump. It was something that enabled them to say, look what Trump's doing. This is a grave danger to press freedom. Now that Trump is gone and it's the Biden administration actively pursuing the prosecution. In fact, it was the Biden Justice Department that appealed the judge's refusal to extradite Assange, which is what's keeping him in prison. They're now almost entirely silent because they don't want to defend Assange, because they don't see him as a real journalist like they are. And they also don't want to criticize the Biden administration for attacking press freedom because it would force them to admit that the only real attack on press freedom during the Trump years is one that they largely ignored, which was this prosecution.
What's interesting to me about the UNC controversy is that absolutely some of it was political. The university got heat, partisan heat, because the
from a donor, right?
From a donor, because the 1619 Project was so politically charged. At the same time, it is sort of grating to see people like Gayle King give an uncritical platform to. And by the way, Nicole Hannah-Jones doesn't need an uncritical platform. She's capable of defending her arguments, perfectly capable of defending her arguments. But that original 1619 Project story had to make substantive corrections, and it was controversial. There was serious criticism of it from historians and bipartisan historians, I should say ideologically diverse historians. So, Brianna, what do you think of this sort of explanation from Nicole Hannah-Jones that I think is being swallowed by a lot of the media, that this is solely a racial issue or a partisan issue? Shouldn't universities also pause and say, maybe we don't want to be rewarding journalists who did have to correct stories, who weren't entirely honest about the corrections made to their stories? Maybe there's a substantive reason to pause this decision in the first place?
Well, Nicole Hannah-Jones, as an individual, is known for some, a fiery way in which she held herself out on social media at times. And I certainly have come at cross paths with her in my own personal history as a journalist. So there's no love lost there. But I still think that it's pretty clear that the way that her tenure process was handled at UNC was unprecedented. Certainly, she was not the first journalist in the history of journalism to have to correct a mistake. And it's not clear to me that that would be on its own sufficient justification to deny her in the middle of that process. I do wish that this weren't quite the hill that liberals had chosen to die on, because although I think the bulk of the 1619 Project, remember the bulk of which was not penned by Nicole Hannah-Jones, it's an anthology of writings by a number of other authors, a number of other journalists, is quite substantive and useful and historically good. I wish there had been, I think, a more clear and early statement from Nicole Hannah-Jones on that correction. I wish that people hadn't decided to kind of defend it on those grounds for as long as they did. And I think that part of the celebration of Nicole Hannah-Jones in this moment and kind of overcoming the obstruction at UNC by going to Howard glosses over some of the structural concerns, the concerns of the type that the 1619 Project is supposed to be dealing with, right? So that normally most people aren't going to be able to escape to a historically Black institution like Howard University, because Howard University struggles enormously with all kinds of funding problems. And the reason that she was able to go and establish this position there was because of, I believe, $20 million in outside money that has come to support her and what has become, as she puts it, a national cause. So there's a lot of dynamics going on here. I don't think this is necessarily the feel-good story that other people would frame it as being. At the same time, I do think it seems pretty clear that UNC was acting in bad faith in denying her tenure.
What can we make of who may be behind this assassination based on the information that we have right now?
I think to start, we need to be very careful about putting too much into the information that we do have. As you know, videos can be doctored. Eyewitness reports right afterwards can be unreliable, or they can be manipulated. And one of the things that's going on in Haiti is there is a power struggle. There are many groups and individuals that have a motive to have done this attack, and any of them could have also put out some of these videos as a way to create a false trail or to create a narrative that helps them out. So I think first we need to be careful about all these public statements until we have some pretty hard and verifiable facts. Second, if it is true that these are foreign mercenaries, that does, I think, limit the list of suspects, because I think that some of the people that have been proposed are Haitian gang members, Haitian political parties. Most of them are probably not going to have the capacity to bring in a foreign mercenary squad. But there are groups that can, including economic elites, including obviously foreign actors that have some interest in this. But other than that, I really think it's premature to make any firm conclusions on who may be responsible.
Oh, so Brian, how confident can we be, and how confident are you that the four suspects that they say were killed and the two that were detained actually are the ones who were involved in the assassination? The claim that they're making is that they intercepted the crew as they were fleeing the scene and engaged in an hours long kind of confrontation that led to this. But how confident are you and our Haitians receiving this news that that's actually true?
I think people are being careful about being confident about that. I haven't seen any reason to specifically doubt that account, but again, governments in the past have rounded up the usual suspects. That's certainly a possibility. It's also a possibility that whoever did the attack somehow set things up so that other people would be targeted for that. And especially with people suspects who are deceased, it's much harder to confirm that they were in fact involved. So I think most people in Haiti are waiting for more details and confirmation until they come to conclusions.